Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar titled Assisted Outpatient Treatment and the Role of Community Mental Health Providers. Today's event is part of a series of webinars hosted by Wayne State University's Center for Behavioral Health and Justice as part of the development of an Assisted Outpatient Treatment toolkit. My name is Nicole Gilbert, and I am the Jail Diversion Manager at the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice. I have the honor of serving as the facilitator for today's discussion. As we begin the event today, I'd like to start with a few housekeeping items. First, you may have noticed that audio and video capabilities have been turned off for attendees. We do this not to limit your participation, but to limit distractions throughout the event, and we appreciate your understanding. Second, the chat feature has also been disabled for this event. While we encourage you to ask all of the questions that come to your mind, we'd like to direct them to one place so that we don't lose track of anything important. That being said, please enter your questions into the Q&A box at any time throughout the event. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible, but if we don't have time to get through all of them, please know that we will share them with our larger AOT work group, and based on the feedback they provide, we may make adjustments or additions to our online toolkit or FAQ page. Next slide, please. As we begin, it's important that we have a shared understanding about what Assisted Outpatient Treatment, or AOT, is. AOT is a legal mechanism for providing treatment to people with severe mental illness, or SMI, while enabling them to remain in their community. We recognize that some people living with SMI don't adhere to recommended treatment for a variety of reasons, and this can increase their risk for suicide and self-harm, violence, substance misuse, insecure housing, and can lead to high rates of repeat hospitalization and incarceration. Through civil court order, AOT compels the recipient to receive treatment and commits the public mental health system to monitor and provide this treatment, with the goal of preventing the individual's condition from worsening. AOT is not the only solution to addressing unmet mental health needs in our communities, but it's an important tool, and we hope that the information that we share with you today helps you better understand the very important role that community mental health providers play within the AOT system of care. Our first presenter today is Jenny Kimmel. Jenny is the supervisor of an AOT program at Genesee Health System, which was implemented in November of 2020. Jenny is a social worker with over 14 years of experience working in various community mental health organizations. She has a passion for working with individuals with severe and persistent mental illness and diverting high-risk individuals into outpatient treatment rather than hospitalization or incarceration. Today, Jenny will be talking about her team's experience with AOT orders in Genesee County, and we're so grateful for her willingness to share her wealth of information with us. After we hear from Jenny, we'll turn it over to Sojourner Jones, who has been working in the mental health field for over 25 years. She currently serves as the community liaison for law enforcement with Detroit-Wayne Integrated Health Network. Sojourner's role is to assist law enforcement and the courts to address behavioral health needs of those who come to the attention of the criminal legal system. She works to resolve structural issues, communication glitches, and consistent patterns between law enforcement, courts, and community mental health providers. We're looking forward to hearing from Sojourner about practical ways that CMH providers participate in the AOT system of care. I will now turn things over to Jenny to talk about her experience implementing an AOT program in Genesee County.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm very glad that you're here to learn more about AOTs and the AOT program at Genesee Health System. Before I begin, I'd like to offer a short history. Next slide, please. GHS and probate court have had a working relationship for over a dozen years. In Genesee County, we have been doing AOTs since 2019, and we're doing ATOs before that. However, it was not a perfect system. Orders were given, but unless the person was assigned to a CMH program, there was little to no oversight. Sometimes, even when assigned to a case manager, the case manager didn't have the adequate training to know how to handle an AOT case. In 2020, we were awarded a grant to create the AOT program. The goal was to create a program that would provide oversight, interventions, and education to the community. We also have had a millage pass recently that will allow for sustainability when the grant period ends. As a result of the grant, we developed the AOT program, and we've divided the work of the program into three main components. The AOT monitor portion of the program, which provides help with getting on AOTs, education and monitoring of the AOTs, and coordination with the courts. The AOT case management part of the program, which provides case management to consumers on AOTs. And our community collaborative meetings, which is a stakeholder meeting to improve communication, education, and coordination. Next slide, please. And next slide. The AOT monitors in the program are responsible for overseeing all AOTs in Genesee County. They track directives from the court, ensuring that needed resources are available to each participant and address any barriers to court-ordered service access that participants may encounter. They ensure timely participant AOT evaluations are scheduled, paperwork is turned into probate court timely, and generally monitor whether the services provided are aligned with each participant's needs. If someone on an AOT has recidivism, they'll review the case and make recommendations, which could include bringing the consumer into our AOT case management program. The AOT monitors provide education to the community regarding AOTs, including how to obtain an AOT or when to violate an order. They communicate with probate court regarding submitting paperwork for violations, status conferences with the judge, or petitions for AOTs. They collect data for our program needs and outcomes. And they're a resource to the community regarding AOTs. For example, we've had some family members in the community concerned about their loved ones call us. We'll talk to them and educate them on AOTs, and we'll talk to their loved ones and try to talk them into voluntarily participating in services. If the situation warrants, then we'll do what we need to do to obtain a court order for treatment in order to prevent a substantial risk of harm to self or others. Next slide, please. We also get a lot of referrals from the community. They come from our CIT trained police officers, the prosecutor's office, probation officers, emergency departments, the jail. The AOT monitors receive these referrals from the community and follow up to connect people to services or get an AOT if it's needed. This includes doing a home visit to assess the need of an AOT following a referral. When someone is discharged from the hospital or jail on an AOT, the monitors may help coordinate an intake appointment if one is not already scheduled. They monitor that the person attends their intake appointment and is successfully connected to services. They will help the person reschedule if the appointment is missed or violate the order if multiple attempts are made with continued noncompliance. They also keep track of due dates and email the treatment team regarding upcoming AOT expirations and 6-month reviews that are due. They're a resource to staff to help fill out the probate paperwork, reviewing the paperwork before it's submitted for any errors. Next slide, please. The AOT coordinator assists with the direction of the AOT program. They facilitate the weekly AOT team meeting discussion about consumers, and they take notes. They attend the weekly AOT hearings, notify the treatment team of what happened in court, and document in our electronic medical record system that the person is on an AOT order, and assigns a monitor for ongoing oversight. In Genesee County, we use PCE, and we have a red banner across the page at the top under the consumer's demographics that identifies that this person is on an AOT order. They also ensure all consumers on AOTs are mailed a copy of their order along with educational material about their court order and the AOT program's role. Consumers on deferrals are also mailed educational information about their deferral and the AOT program's role. Lastly, they're an active member of the NGRI cases. They meet with consumers to complete assessments, write the risk mitigating treatment plans, and revise them as needed. They're a resource to the case manager regarding NGRI cases and how to navigate coordination between the courts and the NGRI committee. We also recently started holding AOT support groups at the recommendation of our judge, and the AOT coordinator facilitates these support groups. The support groups are a place for consumers to feel supported and learn more about how to manage their mental health symptoms in a non-clinical therapy fashion. For example, they might talk about how to manage stress. Next slide, please. A key part of our program is making sure that consumers on AOTs or deferrals are given educational information about it, and this is the coordinator's role. Oftentimes, consumers who are on a combined order or deferral don't remember stipulating or deferring to the order while they were hospitalized. Or sometimes consumers will refuse to meet with their attorney and refuse to attend the hearing, and the hearing is held without them. Therefore, it makes sense that they don't really realize that they're on an order or a deferral or what that means. In our program, the coordinator takes the weekly docket and orders and either mails or personally serves the consumers the needed information. So our consumers on deferrals are mailed an Understanding Your Deferral flyer and a letter from the AOT program informing them of our role. Consumers on an AOT order are mailed a copy of their court order, an Understanding Your Court Order flyer, and the orientation letter. And consumers in our AOT case management program are given a copy of their court order, an Understanding Your Court Order flyer, the orientation letter, and additionally, they're given an AOT program handbook that outlines the AOT case management program. If you go to our website, which is listed at the end of this presentation, we'll have links to these documents that you could review and create your own. Next slide, please. An important component to be addressed for an AOT program is that you have accessibility to doctors to complete the AOT assessments, 6-month reviews, clinical certificates, and testify in court whenever it's needed. GHS has 2 licensed psychiatrists, 1 full-time and 1 part-time, and several nurse practitioners that prescribe medication in our medication clinic. Consumers in GHS are seen by the psychiatrist regarding their AOTs and clinical certificates. We are hiring for a psychiatric PA for medications and AOT testimony, but we have not yet filled that position. We've also contracted with a fully licensed psychologist for initial AOT assessments and clinical certs for consumers who are not yet in our services, or maybe they're in jail. So our psychiatrist cannot bill for the service. Next slide, please. Another critical role is the need to have designated staff to attend all deferral conferences, work with the psychiatric IPU hospitals or inpatient unit hospitals, complete the report on alternative mental health treatment, and things like that. Currently in Genesee County, one of our hospital liaisons completes these tasks. However, after she retires, the monitors will most likely take over. Next slide, please. Consumers on AOTs that have a need for intensive case management services are served by our AOT case managers. The grant pays for case management services for consumers who are uninsured or underinsured. For example, a gentleman who was hospitalized for over a month and given an AOT order did not have Medicaid and would never qualify for it due to having a high income and private insurance. We were able to provide him with services through the grant to help stabilize his mental health symptoms, and we graduated him from the program. Upon discharge, we asked him for a quote regarding his services, and he said, quote, "I would recommend this program to anyone that was in my position when I first started. I've come a long way, and you guys have been fantastic in helping me get back to normal." Case managers provide case management services 1 to 3 times a week to help the consumer get connected to resources, monitor their treatment compliance, and coordinate services. Case managers in the AOT program are trained in motivational interviewing, family psychoeducation, and either have their MCBAT credentials or a development plan to obtain the credentials. Next slide, please. Consumers assigned to an AOT case manager will have regularly scheduled contact with our probate judge in order to receive positive reinforcement or the black robe effect. The black robe effect is essentially the idea that someone will be more likely to do something just because a judge told them to do it. Our goal is that consumers served by the AOT case managers will gain enough insight into their mental health needs that they can be served at a lower level of care. Next slide, please. Next slide. Each week, the AOT coordinator, monitors, and case manager and supervisor have a team meeting to discuss our program needs, our coverage needs, cases assigned to the program, And we make decisions to request status conferences, violations, an increase or decrease in services, if we need to amend the court order, etc. Consumers on the docket for that week that are on a status conference are also discussed, and we decide what to report to the judge and what is our recommendation for the consumer's recovery. Next slide. For consumers that are involved in the case management part of the AOT program, the judge holds the status conferences with the individual and the AOT team. The consumer may invite a natural support to the status conferences if they choose. The frequency of status conferences are determined by a shared decision between the AOT monitor and probate court, with the AOT monitor indicating the clinical need and the probate court indicating the availability of the judge. Generally, our judge holds a weekly time slot for status conferences. In our weekly team meetings, while we discuss consumers, the AOT treatment team decides if a status conference needs scheduled. The AOT monitor will complete the documentation and submit it to probate court to schedule the status conference. Status conferences are for consumers who are non-compliant with treatment, but not to the extent that they need their AOT violated and sent to the hospital. The goal is to allow them a meeting with the judge with the hope that they will then become more compliant with their court-ordered treatment and avoid a hospitalization. Next slide, please. Lastly, we host community collaborative meetings with various agencies in Genesee County. We started off meeting monthly and have recently decided to decrease to every other month. We have invited various key AOT stakeholders to the meeting, which can include the local hospitals, our contracted case management providers, probate court, prosecutor's office, law enforcement, jail, and an after-hours crisis program. We have invited NAMI and a defense attorney and a guardian, but they don't attend regularly. Next slide, please. During the meetings, we discuss data trends, barriers, or issues that we're seeing with consumers receiving necessary and appropriate treatment, and we problem solve these concerns. At each meeting, the AOT program has provided education on a topic related to AOTs for the representatives to take back and train their staff. Next slide, please. Outside of our community collaborative meetings, we've also formed partnerships with one another. An AOT program needs to have all key stakeholders on the same page to be successful. So if you want to start an AOT program in your county, I suggest first getting the stakeholders together and talk about your roles and how you can work together for AOTs. Once you have a good working relationship, you can start working in other ways that could benefit consumers. And some of the things that we've done is the prosecutor's office has dropped or reduced criminal charges after an individual was put on an AOT. We've helped defense attorneys make contact with their consumers prior to AOT hearings. We understand each other's role in the AOT processes and how to support one another. The AOT program provides education and consultation for case managers in the consumer's cases. And we've also worked together to develop the AOT Addendum To Petition that we turn in with all of our AOT petitions to facilitate effective communication regarding the petitions and what we were requesting to be ordered. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Next slide, please. In order to set your program up for success, it helps to have multiple avenues for contact, but also these avenues need to be streamlined to appropriate staff. We take referrals through our website, email, phone calls, or a fax. We also have a referral form for people to fill out, but we have a no wrong door policy. I recommend considering setting up for group correspondence if you have multiple staff for coverage purposes. So for example, we have AOT program at gnhs.org for general AOT questions and correspondence, and that email goes to all of the monitors and the coordinator and myself. We also have violations at gnhs.org for any of the violation requests, and that goes to the monitors and the hospital liaison. We have a phone number that the voicemail goes directly to the AOT program's email. And we have clearly defined bottom line responsibility, but with staff cross-trained for coverage. Next slide, please. You will need to figure out what works for your county. We have developed a few specific forms for ours. We have the AOT Addendum to Petition, a notification of non-compliance and request for status conference, a notification of scheduled status conference, and a weekly docket. And we've also developed training and education materials about how and when to extend an AOT, training PowerPoints, and some AOT policies, processes, and procedures. Next slide, please. So this is the Addendum to Petition that I talked about earlier. This is a form that we turn in with all of our petitions for AOTs. It outlines what the petitioner is praying to be included in the AOT order. As you can see, it lists all things that could be court ordered via the mental health code. And we call it the Addendum to Petition for AOT. Next slide, please. This is our notification of status conference. The monitors fill this out and copies are given to the consumer, the case manager, probate, and the AOT paralegal at the prosecutor's office. In order to request a status conference, we slightly modified the notification of noncompliance SCAO form and added a checkbox that says that we're requesting a status conference. Next slide, please. This is an example of the docket that we have for our status conferences. The AOT paralegal at the prosecutor's office attends our status conferences and sits off to the side and takes notes. He uses the notes and the notifications of status conferences to create a weekly docket that he provides to both GHS and the court prior to our scheduled status conferences. Next slide, please. The last recommendation I have for starting an AOT program is to study the mental health code regarding AOTs. It gives you an outline of the minimal things that your program needs to do. It provides you the bottom line roles and responsibilities as a CMH or the agency responsible for AOT orders. Next slide. If you're interested in initiating an initial AOT order for either combined hospitalization and AOT or an AOT only, you'll need certain forms. For the combined hospitalization and AOT, you'll need the PCM 201, the MC 97, and 2 clinical certificates. In Genesee County, we also turn in the AOT Addendum to Petition. For assisted outpatient treatment only, you still have to turn in the PCM 201 petition for mental health treatment and the MC 97 form. However, you do not need to turn in a clinical certificate, but you do have to have doctor testimony secured before the scheduled hearing, as the doctor will have to testify at the hearing about their assessment and their findings. Next slide, please. Here's the website for where to find the SCAO court forms. They update sometimes, and probate has to accept the most recent version. So it's best to always get your forms from the website. You'll need to find the PCM 201 petition for mental health treatment. And this form, you'll check a box for what you're requesting, whether it be hospital only, AOT only, or a combination. The MC 97, which is the protected personal identifying information form, and also the clinical certificates. Next slide, please. This slide is an example of how to fill out the petition for mental health treatment. As you can see, this form can be used to request 3 different types of court orders and a pickup order if needed. Make sure everything on here you write is factual. You can write per records to include things that you personally reviewed in the record. Anything you write in here could be brought up in a court hearing. Next slide, please. This slide shows how to fill out the MC 97 form. This form is basically just separating the consumer's personal information from the petition. The petition is a public file, and this keeps the consumer's personal information from the public. Next slide, please. And this is what a clinical certificate looks like. This form is completed by a doctor or a PA that is directly supervised by a psychiatrist. This form is based off of assessments and indicates that what the doctor feels if the person meets criteria as a person requiring treatment and the supporting evidence to their assessment. The doctor should be prepared to testify on anything that they write on this form. Next slide, please. A couple notes. A psychiatrist, physician, or a fully licensed psychologist must examine the individual and can review documentation for the AOT assessment. A clinical certificate must be turned into the court within 72 hours of the assessment date. The consumer must be notified that what is said during the assessment is not privileged communication and may be said during the court hearing. There's a statement on the top of the clinical certificate that our doctors just read verbatim to the consumers. If the assessment is for an AOT only, then you still need to read the statement at the top of the clinical certificate, but you don't have to actually complete the clinical certificate. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. For more information or for how to contact us, please feel free to visit our website at www.gnhs.org/AOT_Maine. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's clear that there are tons of details that go into implementing and monitoring an AOT program, and your experience in Genesee County really sets a great example for how these types of programs might be implemented or how they might look in other parts of the state. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with all of us today. As a reminder, if you have any questions for Jenny, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. We see that there are already a few coming in, which is great. Also want to let everyone know that these slides will be available to you on our AOT Toolkit website after the event. So within the next week or so, we'll have all of these slides and a recording of the webinar published for you to access if you want to refer back to this information at a later date. Next, I'd like to invite Sojourner Jones to talk with us about some of the practical applications of AOT for CMH providers.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. I am Sojourner Jones from Detroit, Wayne, and so let's get started. Next slide. Some highlights of the mental health code revisions are important. There's a lot of change that has taken place over the years. Kevin's Law, which is really what AOT is, was initiated in 2005 of March. There were the first amendments of February of 2017, and then the most recent took place in March of 2019. The additional amendments to Kevin's Law purpose was really to authorize courts and community mental health agencies to develop and utilize AOT programs, generally used in lieu of hospitalization for people who fail to comply with prescribed treatments. All references to the alternative treatment order have been deleted and replaced with assisted outpatient treatment. The orders focus more so on capacity and conduct. We often look at those behaviors that bring our members into treatment. However, it is important to also look at their capacity, meaning in terms of the risk, not meeting their basic needs. Is their judgment impaired by their mental illness so that the person's unable to understand their need for treatment? Requires a transport order. Transport orders are a very valuable asset for our members because for most of them, they will not seek treatment. And so the old standard had a language that talked about immediate risk of harm to self or others. The new standard talks about substantial risk of harm due to impaired judgment. An individual must meet the requirement for a person requiring treatment. The petition and mental health treatment order for transport are both signed by the petitioner. The mental health treatment form PCM 201 and the order for transport form PCM 209 is signed by the judge, filed by probate court. and then the documents are then delivered to law enforcement. The order is valid for 10 days. And so it's important to know that time frame. The one thing that I've learned about AOTs is the time frames, because it is a court. They have certain time frames that we have to adhere to. Testimony and clinical certs are also very important. We'll get into testimony in a later slide. And my cohort, Jenny, talked about the clinical certs in her presentation. And then the duration of orders have also been amended. For combination order, there's a minimum of 60 inpatient, 180 outpatient. AOT only is initially 60 and it can be extended, and the same for inpatient hospitalization. Next slide. One of the most important features of the AOT is the member having a right to defer, meaning that they are in agreement, will adhere to their services in the community. However, court is not needed, and therefore treatment order is not entered. And so the importance with the deferral conference, in accordance with the mental health code, the individual will be appointed legal counsel and meet with the attorney to discuss the process for deferring the hearing. Within 72 hours of the involuntary admission, the inpatient hospital will schedule a deferral conference. The assigned attorney will meet with the member prior to the conference. The hospital is required to give notice to the relevant interested parties, including mental health providers. Participants in the deferral conference include the member, their attorney, a representative from their treatment team in the community. If they do not have one, then a representative from the local PIHP in their county of where they reside will attend. The individual may also request an advocate or other person, including someone from the Office of Recipient Rights if desired. The proposed treatment team of the community should be explained to the individual what services they're going to receive, what past compliance they may have had while they were receiving those services. The attorney explains the nature and possible consequences of the commitment procedures. The court order will be a public document. The person signs a request to defer, form PCM 235, and will be under the court supervision for 180 days. Box number 5 is checked to allow a peace officer to take the person into protective custody if they are not complying. A deferral may be offered to the person until the time of the proposed hearing. The request to defer must identify the provider of the AOT, and the hospital must arrange the transfer of services or warm handoff. If an individual is on a combined 180-day deferral and is not admitted during the 180 days, the deferral expires and the individual is no longer under the court supervision. For individuals with an active treatment team, a letter of noncompliance is signed by the treating psychiatrist, order to modify PCM 217A and PCM 209, order for examination transport are completed and filed. When the individual does not have a treating psychiatrist to provide a letter of noncompliance, then an order to modify order for AOT or combined hospitalization and AOT, form PCM 217A, notification of noncompliance form, PCM 230, order of report after notification, and report form PCM 231 are completed and filed with the court. As stated earlier by Jenny, it is very important that you read the mental health code. It gives an outline, as she stated, of the many requirements for CMH providers. Chapter 4 in its entirety provides the bottom line and those responsibility as a CMH or agency responds for overseeing the court. Next slide. I know that for me, I was never taught how to testify in court. And so for a lot of our clinicians, they have apprehensiveness to going in front of the court. And so I wanted to be able to talk to you a little bit about testifying one-on-one. It is important that you show up on time. If court started 8:15, please be there 7:45 if you have to go in person, or at least 8 a.m. if it's virtual. Be camera ready in a quiet place if it's virtual, meaning For men, please wear a collared shirt, and women, a nice blouse. No t-shirts are allowed. We are respecting the court. Review your case prior to court. If the member is not necessarily on your caseload or you have no idea, please take the time to do your research, to go through your electronic medical record form or any other documentation that you have so that you can present the most current clinical information that you have for that member. Only testify to the information that you have clinical access and knowledge of. There is no eating and/or drinking in court. And remember, you are on the record, meaning that this is a court proceeding and it is recorded. So please take that in mind. Testify with confidence. Because you've done your due diligence, you've done your homework, you know the clinical knowledge for this member, you can testify in confidence that what you are stating is accurate and factual. And then be mindful of court etiquette. Allow the judge to speak. You don't want to overtalk the judge. You want to be able to answer the questions in a professional manner. I laugh and tease because like I said earlier, no one teaches you when you go to school for social work that you would have to testify in court. So hopefully these tips that I've given you will be able to provide some additional assistance. Next slide. Practical tips in terms of the clinicians for this population. AOTs are not easy. This is the population who we have the most difficult time engaging those members into treatment. However, it is important that the clinician that they come in contact have some of these key elements. One of the big pieces that I could always say about AOTs is the coordination, communication are key. You have to make sure that your right hand and your left hand are talking in sync. We have to make sure we do that collaboration and coordination of all services, from the inpatient facility to the member CMH provider in the treatment to the guardian in the process. Because if not, we don't have those three components, the member will surely recycle back and be in an inpatient setting. Remember, we are here to serve the member. And so, yes, it is a court order, but we let the member still have their choice. We inform them, we encourage them, we educate them in regards to them being on this AOT and how they even ended up on an AOT. Conferences do need to take place and they are time sensitive. Judge Mack says it all the time. When we have a deferral conference, if the member, the inpatient hospital setting, and the attorneys are all not present, then a deferral conference has not taken place and a hearing should proceed. Start discharge planning for the treatment in the community as soon as the member is admitted inpatient, meaning the hospital is reaching out to where the member receives CMH services. If the member's case is closed and is no longer connecting, then the hospital is working with their utilization review team to find out where the member has in the past received those services. If the member is new to receiving CMH services, it is very, very critical that they get additional supports. Within Detroit Wayne, we have a complex case management program that helps our first-time members or any member, especially those who may have some pre-existing health conditions, to be able to coordinate those services and get them the additional supports they need, both in the hospital as well as in the community. Inform the member of the purpose of why they're even at a deferral conference, why they're even on an AOT, and those possible consequences and the plan in the community. Yes, AOTs are civil commitments. However, it is still a commitment and the member agreed to it. And so we want to make sure we hold them responsible for and be a man or woman of their word to commit to completing this process. We review all current treatment modalities with the member, the ones that are working on an inpatient setting, the ones that's not working on an inpatient setting, the continuity of care for when they were in the community to what they are currently receiving in the inpatient setting. Remember, treatment takes place in the community. We stabilize them at the hospital so that they can come out in the community and continue to receive the treatment for them. And again, guardians are key. Please make sure if the member has a guardian that we include them in the process. And also remember, guardians don't dictate clinical decisions. They can be consulted, but they don't dictate clinical decisions. We understand that this is a shift and this is a new process that's being enforced. So please, 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 Rome wasn't built in a day. You're not going to understand all the components, all the PCM2 forms I talked about, and that with time and education and understanding, you too will be able to get your AOT program up and running.
Thank you, Sojourner. All of those practical tips I found helpful as I learned more about AOT, and I hope that the audience found those informative as well. At this time, we are going to move into the Q&A portion, and we have tons of questions coming in, which is wonderful to see. I'm going to start with some questions that were asked during Jenny's presentation and are specific to your program. The first one is just asking, how many AOT monitors do you have?
I currently have 2 monitors, and I'm working on hiring a third. I have last I looked, we had about 375 AOTs and deferrals that we were overseeing in our county.
Thank you, Jenny. The next question has to do with the consumer participating in their AOT order. So when there's no consequences for noncompliance, this question asker says that the AOT order loses its utility. So other than waiting for the person's symptoms to worsen, what can CMHs do, if anything, to encourage compliance or participation in this AOT treatment process? Obviously, there are some challenges when people don't recognize their symptoms. So what kind of tips would you have to engage people in that treatment process when they're not participating otherwise?
Sure. So I disagree that there are no consequences for noncompliance. There are several consequences. This person could be on their AOT order longer. They could start to decompensate and have to go to the hospital or get picked up from the police and brought to the hospital for an assessment. In Genesee County, we also have our status conferences with the judge. So they have to go in front of the judge and answer to the judge why they're not following their court order. So it's hard to answer that question because I disagree on the premise that there are no consequences. So that's my answer.
I'll add that part of the reason why a lot of members aren't successful is they don't even know that they're on an order. So as I talked about earlier, that coordination, communication, letting them know, hey, you agreed to do this, that, and the other. The judge says that you're going to do this, that, and the other. You met with your CMH provider, filling in those gaps, having those conversations where all parties are present help a lot, because usually most entities operate on their own. So when you have the deferral conference and you meet with the person, their attorney and their CMH provider, it gives them a little bit more insight, because you don't get to say what you want to say and don't have any accountability. The other piece, even if the member doesn't defer, you can still hold a discharge plan meeting prior to the member even coming back in the community. So again, you'll have the CMH provider, and if they're not active with a CMH, you'll have someone from the PHIP who will be able to sit there and have access and say, hey, look, you haven't shown up, you've had this amount of hospitalizations, what are we going to do different? And so again, as I talked about being able to fill those gaps, coordinate, institute warm handoffs, meaning that the day that the member gets discharged from the inpatient facility, connect them right with their CRISP on that same day. So they'll have that continuity of care. As much as possible to alleviate the gaps and for the member to fall through the cracks is the biggest piece, I think, in order to make the AOT successful.
It sounds like that communication with the member and other partners in the community and collaboration is really what helps make these programs successful. Great, thank you both for that additional information. So for individuals who are under an AOT order, is that the only case management that they're receiving, or is it possible that they also have services through adult case management?
In Genesee County, we have individuals in regular adult case management. And then those with intensive case management needs are served in our AOT case management program. And then consumers that have even more intensive needs that need to be served by our assertive community treatment team program are served at that level of care. So we match consumers to their level of care needs.
So in Wayne County, like I said, it depends if they're active with CMH. One of the beauties of AOTs is that it gives you a list of what services you're recommending for the member. And so, the member may have just never showed up, received anything. And so now they are eligible for assertive community treatment team. They are eligible for SUD services. Yes, we know they're voluntary, but at least if we can get them thinking about changing their behavior, then we consider that a success. If the member may need a med drop, because they don't have access to transportation. The whole goal of AOT is to alleviate those barriers. And so within Detroit Wayne, as I talked about, we have complex case management where we'll actually go to the inpatient setting prior to the member even being released and discharged to talk about, hey, what are your needs? Remember, I talked about discharge planning starts at the day of inpatient, not necessarily when the member is ready to be released in the community. Another part of AOT that we talked about is that the case management plan prior to discharge from the hospital. That is another way to be able to coordinate those services, put it in writing, what you're going to do, because the CMH also has to send the court a copy of their updated IPOS or even acknowledge that they're going to update the member's IPOS, which again talks about their plan of service. So it's again, that coordination, that talking, and I just believe you give the member the best bang for their buck while you have them. And if that includes intensive complex case management, then that's what they'll get.
Great, thank you both for that. I'm going to jump back to this non-compliance piece because we have a couple of follow-up questions coming in. Someone said, I have such a hard time understanding how a citizen or individual would not know that they were on an AOT order. Can you talk a little bit about how that occurs and how people might slip through those cracks?
I can say members sign to do whatever they need or think they need to do to get out the hospital, because they have been in this cycle of having a crisis, go inpatient, come out, never follow up with treatment or inconsistency with their treatment, have a crisis, go inpatient again, and start that repetitive cycle. And then you have to remember, when they come to this point, they may or may not be properly medicated. And so they will sign and do and agree to a whole lot of stuff that they have no knowledge. That's why it is so important to have those meetings to remind them that, hey, you signed this, you agreed to this. And so as an adult, we have to acknowledge our responsibility. And that's the beauty of having those, like I say, those meetings, to be able to remind them that this is what you signed. And this is how we're going to help you help yourself. Jenny?
Yeah, and in addition, for us, we are mailing or personally serving a copy of the court order, the information about what does this deferral or AOT order mean, and that orientation letter that really outlines, like, this is what you need to do, and if you don't do this, then this is what we have to do. These are our responsibilities. I think a lot of those conversations, take place in the hospital, but as we know, when people are in the hospital for mental health reasons, sometimes they're not making the best memories. So to have that follow-up piece when they get discharged from the hospital, to have, the documentation mailed to them, those deferrals, if, mail a copy of that deferral that has their signature on it to them, or personally hand it off to them, and continue those conversations even after they get out of the hospital to just help them remember what happened.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. What percentage of people on AOT orders require a meeting with the judge due to non-compliance? If you had to estimate.
A small percentage, I would say maybe 10% tops. And since the start of our AOT program, we have only turned in violations on about 5% of our our population. The majority of our people are following their court orders in Genesee County.
Within Wayne County, we don't have those numbers because we have a new behavioral health unit, which is the first in the state that didn't start until March of this year. However, we are seeing some patterns because now we have one judge, Chief Judge Burton, who is hearing all of the cases. And so I think with the upcoming changes, with him being the only judge hearing them, as well as transport orders and having the behavioral health unit for oversight and enforcement, we'll be able to see some decreases. And other things like recidivism, members not following up with treatment, and then also decrease inpatient hospitalization.
I just want to piggyback off of what Soja just said, that we also have just one judge that hears all of our stuff and has for a very long time. So she's very familiar with our people in the county.
Sojo, you mentioned AO or transport orders. Any history from your experience of police departments being somewhat resistant to following those transport orders? What happens if that pickup does not occur as it's outlined? Can you talk a little bit about any challenges with that transport order process?
Unfortunately, yes, there are some police officers, some police districts who have not been as adherent to the transport orders as we'd like. However, there is power in judicial judges. And so that's not a fight that I fight. I hand that over back to Judge Burton, and he can do what he needs to do within his judicial ramifications. However, I have found out that sometimes the entities don't have enough staff. They have more, not necessarily important cause, but more life-saving causes. And so it may delay, but the beauty of the transport order is that it's 10 days. And so once you remind them of that, I have found going face-to-face and letting them know, how beneficial this is to them, because majority of the transport orders in smaller settings and smaller communities, they know who the members are as well. And so again, beginning to build that communication and that relationship to say how it's going to be a benefit and a win for us all has sometimes swayed some of those departments.
And I'll add too that we have invited law enforcement to our community collaborative meetings. And I think that having that communication and coordination in place is just huge. I also present at all of the CIT trainings that we're doing in Genesee County to inform them about AOTs and also their roles in pickup orders. And so that once they have an understanding of the law and the mental health code, a lot of times they're like, okay, well, I can't do it now, but I could maybe do it tomorrow. Like Sojo said, like they are willing to work with us. And again, needing to get probate judge involved as a last resort is always something that we're willing to do too.
Great, thank you. We have a couple questions coming in about the 2 clinical certificates that are required for hospitalization petition. Can you explain a little bit more about where those clinical certificates are coming from and whether they need to be 2 different people? Are they the same person? Who is completing those certificates?
Sure. So the mental health code identifies that 2 clinical certificates are needed for somebody to be hospitalized involuntarily. Those certificates need to be filled out by a doctor, and those are usually done for us in our emergency department. So it'll be 2 different doctors that are working in the emergency department that have personally assessed that person and have completed the clinical certificate. For continuing AOTs or for AOT onlys, then it is just 1 doctor to assess the person, and continuing AOTs need to have a clinical certificate, but initial petitions for AOT onlys do not need the clinical certificate. They just need the doctor assessment.
Also, your pre-screening entities they have a psychiatrist on staff who can also serve as one of the two. And so if you have a crisis stabilization unit where the member is seen at, they should have two as well. But most of your pre-screening entities have more than one. And so it needs to be two different ones.
I'm also seeing a few questions come in about monitoring people who have private insurance. So they're not covered by Medicaid, they're not uninsured or underinsured. Whose responsibility is it for carrying out that AOT order? And how are those folks monitored, and how do we ensure that they're connected to treatment?
Sure. For us, the order is also ordered the Genesee Health System to oversee the person's treatment and that they're getting the court-ordered services. And that's why we have created the monitor position. So the monitor reaches out to those agencies in the community that are not CMH affiliated to make sure that the person is attending their appointments and there are no concerns. They'll talk to the consumer themselves to make sure that they're doing, what they need to do for the court order. So it's the monitor's responsibility.
And here locally in Wayne County, as I stated, our behavioral health unit, that is their role, is to monitor those persons who aren't under Medicare or Medicaid and wouldn't be covered by the PIHP. The other piece is that the order follows the member. So it doesn't matter where the people go, who's providing the insurance. It is for the member to receive the treatment. And so I just want to make that piece too.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because we had a question submitted through our toolkit website about people that might move in between counties. Can you talk to that process of like, how does that person continue to receive treatment if they're moving to a totally different part of the state? Whose responsibility is that to make sure that that happens and that they get connected to those services?
So if the member has a CMH provider in the community, it is a responsibility of that CMH provider to do what's considered a warm handoff. So if the member is, say, for instance, living in Genesee and they want to move to Washtenaw, it's important that whoever the CMH provider is in Genesee gather all the clinical information, have the member sign a release, and be able to do that warm handoff and connect that member to their new CMH provider. So again, that coordination and communication and continuity of care is so very important. And it's no different than if you were to switch primary medical providers. You want to ensure that, so you make sure that those communications take place so that you won't have a lack in treatment.
There's also a petition to change venue. So whenever our consumers get successfully connected, our next step is to petition the court to change the venue of their court order. So then it will follow them to the new county.
Thank you, Jenny. I forgot that form.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. I was going to ask that follow-up question as well. We are getting close on time, but let's see if we can pull one more question. One of the questions is about the difference between ATOs and AOT, and just defining those terms and how AOT came to replace those ATOs.
That was a statute change. I believe, I can only say for what I've seen in the past, is that it's more concrete. It outlines what the services are. And so that's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know why legislation does what legislation do.
And they did make it a little bit easier to get an AOT. So previously they had that the person had to have, 2 assessments for an AOT and, a couple different, it's been several years since we've done it the other way, so I don't remember exactly. But with the legislative change, they made some adjustments that reduced some of those barriers that we were experiencing to get people on the order. And so for us, it was really helpful to have this legislative change.
Thank you both so much for all of the information that you've shared with us today. And thank you to our audience for participating and asking some really great questions. There are still several questions that are unanswered. So as a reminder, we are going to take these questions back to our larger work group, get some feedback from our experts around the state, and use that information to update our frequently asked questions page and the content within the AOT toolkit itself. So the AOT toolkit website, it should be up on your screen right now. It's behaviorhealthjustice.wayne.edu/AOT. And on that toolkit, you can find a recording of this webinar, the presentation slides, and lots of other resources about AOT and all of the different partners that are involved in the system of care. If you have any additional questions or feedback about the toolkit, there are also opportunities to submit those on the toolkit website. Thanks again for everyone's time today, and we hope you have a great rest of the week.